addition to seeing, you might be aware of the Danchenko trial, which has been going on in the last few days in America. Danchenko relates to a man called Christopher Steele, who is an ex-MI6 officer, and the British establishment and many people say that Christopher Steele is an expert on Russian relations. But the trial, which was like a debate, because you have the two sides in the trial, unearths some incredible things. And if I read from the New York Post, you can see what debate does, because we have the government narrative saying that Christopher Steele produced this dossier as evidence of Russian collusion with Donald Trump. And then you have what actually emerged from the trial. And if I read this, very interesting, from the New York Post, it says, it's irrespective of whether you like Donald Trump or not, everybody should be treated fairly and honestly. A Democratic PR executive, an ally of the Clinton family, who contributed information to the infamous Steele dossier, said Thursday he made up the sourcing of a claim that wound up in the discredited anti-Trump report. John Stolen Jr., a former aide to Hillary Clinton, testified in John Durham's trial against Igor Danchenko on Thursday that he heard a claim about Donald Trump's 2016 campaign while watching TV and regurgitated it to Danchenko, telling him that he had heard it from a GOP friend over drinks. I actually got it off cable news, Donovan said, according to the Washington Times, adding that he was trying to throw Danchenko a bone because he was helping. The nugget of information was related to former Trump campaign manager Paul Manafort and purportedly provided insight into why he had left the campaign. It made it into ex-British spy Christopher Steele's dossier via Danchenko, despite the sourcing being completely fabricated. So people have seen this now, even though Danchenko has been acquitted in the trial. This evidence that that Steele dossier was entirely fabricated has come out into the public domain. And like Prince Andrew, that seeing will have an effect on life. It's inevitable that once people see things, there's a change in society, as far as I can see. So I hope we've set the scene for tonight, that we are basically using debate to unearth things which have been suppressed and not seen, and that's the purpose of our debate. And we've got some really excellent people tonight, and then I hope when we open it to the floor that you'll participate and we can share this amongst ourselves tonight. So if we start the debate, I've got my hammer. If anybody speaks to me also, I hit it now to shut myself up. And first of all, I should explain that we are proposers for the motion, and the motion is, this House proposes there is no censorship in the UK. And our first speaker is Mike Donovan.
Oh, he's standing? Yes.
Oh
no.
You don't have to.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, my fellow proposers and opposers. My name is Mike Donovan. As first proposer for the motion, that means I'm going to persuade all of you to back the motion. So by the time, there won't be any coercive techniques at the end, as was used last night, but by persuasive argument, I'm going to say that there is no censorship. And what do we mean by that? Because there is a little bit of an error there. What we mean is, does the government willfully suppress information that is not in the public interest? That, I think, is the motion tonight. Not is there no censorship, because Shakespeare was censored, lots of people have been censored, and I will come on to that. Do they willfully suppress information? And I will use evidence to say that they don't. There will be anecdotal stuff as well, to say that they do not willfully suppress information. I'm sure that my fellow proposers will say the same, and it will make an interesting debate with the opposers. Let me talk about the ordinary man in the UK. I went to my accountant earlier this year and said, please will you censor my accounts? I didn't actually say that, but I said, do you believe in censorship in the UK? He said, no, there's no censorship here. And I said, well, why not? He said, because I think he's Generation X, which means he's 45 to 57 or whatever it is. He's 1965 to 84. And he said, because we have free speech in the UK. We can talk. You know, I grew up in a country where we have not the 9 o'clock news, Monty Python, Splitting Image, all of these things, the political satire, that caricatures, Scarf, all of these people that, you know, took the mickey out of our system. We have free speech. That was his stance. The next thing he said, there is censorship. I see Derek and Clive Got the Horn was banned between 1980 and 1983 for abusive language. But probably Mary Whitehouse, if those remember, Mary Whitehouse was involved in that. She was very much a campaigner against abusive language and obscenities. We do have laws that protect all of us. So as a government, not as a government spokesman, but for the motion, we have laws that protect us. It's a question of whether those laws cross boundaries. And that's what you're going to have to decide tonight for yourselves. I'm proposing that they don't. So what else does my esteemed accountant says? The BBC, they're one of the fairest organisations in the world. I'm seeing that's not a laugh. They are one of the fairest, and they comply with their mission statement and also the National Union of Journalists Code of Conduct. Now that's his view. He's not the 99%, but he thinks he's the 60%. So that's really important. If he thinks that, how are we going to convince everyone about... I'm here to propose the motion. COVID-19 introduced a different threat, which the government responded to really well, to local and global threats, and vaccines were introduced to protect us. That's his view. The NHS is one of the best health services in the world. And I had 3 jabs and I'm still doing your accounts. It's a pity that the government can't do theirs, that's what he said, but that's me just manipulating it a little. The government has the best scientists in the world working on the science using Bayesian probability statistical models from Imperial College. They kept us informed all the time during lockdowns and supported business where possible with civils loans, that's the Corona's Business Interruption Loan Scheme, and the BBL, the Bounce Back Loan Scheme. Jabbing in schools was considered necessary to get the schools back. It's a pity that those in power got called party while we were at home. It goes with the job, irrespective of the issues across the country. Ukraine, whatever the history of Ukraine, Russia has ignored the borders of the sovereign nation. That's his view. My opinion may have been nudged or guided, but at least it is my opinion. And I can change it if someone shows me a different, more credible story. And I thought that was fair dues, actually. The only thing that they should censor is the amount of legislation and tax legislation that is even too complicated for the Treasury. We are far too busy these days with compliance and my clients' compliance issues, and to get through to the HMRC takes at least 90% longer than it did, and then you don't have people capable of answering the questions. It's become far too complex. That was his view. So my next notion is pluralism working with global interests. We have to walk in government a fine line between protecting the interests of the country and the global and our position in the global power of the world. So the government did, so censorship is imposed by the moral. We don't impose censorship on companies. They do that. Private companies do that of their own accord. We don't impose it. So if the major tech companies do that, or other companies in the UK, private companies do that, That isn't through our guidelines. They make those choices. So so we increased our emergency powers to embrace the emergency, but in the minor excursions of civil liberties, we're against a small minority groups who do not agree with the government view or agenda. That we stand by. You know, there is a majority in the country that believed in our, if you like, our protection and our guardianship. So I just want to say that those are the main arguments as a debater that I'm putting forward. The next thing is legal rights and remedies. There are legal rights and remedies. There's a negative right to freedom of speech in common law. And what does negative and positive mean? It's implied. Obscenity laws were there for very good reasons. Libel laws, defamation, 2013 and 96. Blasphemy laws. Stage licensing dating back to 1737, where you have the Master of the Revels. Shakespeare fell foul only once in his life of the censor, where in Richard II, he's seen set for the king to be deposed. And Elizabeth said, you can't do that, because my Earl of Essex took that idea from your play. So she cut it out. Censorship in that level has been with us for a long time. But do we willfully suppress information? The notion is no. Current policy to prevent, so radio, private, I already spoke about Derek Horn, but Clockwork Orange, a lot of films have been banned in this country. We have film censorship. A lot of radio censorship, a lot of songs have been banned over time and modified. Let me just talk about one thing. How am I doing for time, Chum? 1 minute. Oh, God, I've got to hurry. Current policy to preserve freedom of speech. Evidence. What is the government? In 12th of May 2021, we introduced a Higher Education Freedom of Speech Bill, now in the committee stage of the House of Lords. It's the basic human right to be able to express ourselves freely and take part in rigorous debate. That law protects those rights. Cambridge University has come out in favour of that law, protecting our rights to free debate and open debate. So I'm just going to close off on this one as an anecdotal, because before the cult of clitoris. This is a very interesting thing called the clitoris libel trial. I just went in 1918, dancer Maud Allen became embroiled in a scandal that reached the highest echelons of the British establishment. Allen was known for her erotic dance vision of Salome, based on Oscar Wilde's Salome, which was performed at London's Palace Theatre in Soho. In January 1918, independent MP Noel Pemberton Billing claimed that 47,000 Britons had been identified as sexual perverts in a German black book. They were therefore susceptible to blackmail by German enemies during the First World War, because he claimed in lesbian ecstasy the most secrets of state were betrayed. The perverts included Allen. In another article, The Cult of the Clitoris, he further claimed that Allen was involved with Margot Asquith, the wife of former Prime Minister Herbert Asquith. Allen brought charges against Pemberton for libel. She lost. But what was interesting at the Old Bailey, she lost. Lord Douglas, lover of Oscar Wilde, translated Wilde's Salome as a witness. Douglas described Wilde as the greatest force for evil that has appeared in Europe during the last 350 years. Allen's lesbianism was proved, the defence claimed, by her knowledge of sexological and anatomical words such as clitoris. These words were largely unknown to most people at the time. Lord Albemarle reportedly asked colleagues at the Turf Club, "Who is this Greek chap clitoris?" They are all talking about, in the end, Maud have lost her case. I'm asking the audience here to support the motion in the ayes, and that the government doesn't willfully suppress information. I'd just like to say one thing quickly. I know that Jeff Wyatt died. I actually spoke to him just before he died. He said, "I'm going to come to your debate and give you the hardest time possible." It is his memorial on Saturday, and we had a very beautiful service last Monday. It was fantastic. So thank you.
because we've asked members of the establishment to give their narrative in the debate. But we were totally unsuccessful. We didn't manage to find anybody, young or old, from the establishment to represent the motion. And this is why we've got Mike and Deja Lambers, who will be James Locke, and a member of the Behavioural Insights team, which will become clear, and Gloria Moss, who is actually appearing as
Professor Sleepy.
oh, that's right, Professor Sleepy from Cambridge University. And we didn't intend to set the debate up like this, but because the debate requires both sides, we have had to present the government side. So I hope you understand why we've had to do it this way. And now I turn to Mark Sharman. I'm sure most of you know that Mark used to run ITN, used to run Sky News, and so we couldn't have a more fitting person to talk about censorship, and because he's been on the inside and knows exactly what goes on. And so I'll pass it over to Mark.
Thank you. Before you start my 8 minutes, I'd just like to say a couple of things. If that's okay.
Certainly.
I'm very pleased to see some of the people here who stand outside Parliament and roundabouts and work really hard to get the message across, because it's all right for us to do television at the top end, but what you people do on the streets is absolutely fantastic, so thank you for that. And secondly, some of you may know that we made a film called Taking Effect, A Second Opinion. Now, there's two things about that. Number one, a lot of you here may well be vaccinated. This was not an anti-vax film. What it called for was proper informed consent. You know, the film called for you to be told what the vaccine was really about, and it also appealed for help for those people who have been injured. So it wasn't anti-vax. So if you've all been somebody who may have been vaccinated, that's absolutely fine. The other thing is, if you have seen the film, thank you for the support. And secondly, I'm going to apologise because some of the words in here you may well recognise. Okay. I'm going to talk about the BBC rather than the government, but there are those that suggest it's one and the same thing. Anyway, the BBC is celebrating its centenary. 100 years of broadcasting to the UK and the world, during which time it's created a reputation for quality and impartiality. Today, in this special year for them, the BBC, in my view, does not deserve that reputation. In common with the rest of mainstream media, it has abandoned the core principles of journalism. It's become a cheerleader for the government, or rather, for a world narrative. Now, we may hear later who's controlling that narrative, but as someone who's spent 50 years, more than 50 years in journalism, I'm going to look mainly at the messages. COVID-19 has changed the world, and I will predict that it will turn out to be the greatest scandal of my lifetime. Disastrous, inhumane lockdowns, experimental jabs, and the vilification and bullying of those who refused to be injected. You know, the so-called anti-vaxxers. Funny thing is, we may be right after all, or they may be right after all. I mean, so I'm not. Through it all, the mainstream media has been front and centre, trumpeting whatever message is required. That's not our job. Our job is to question government policy, to root out the lies, to oppose the scandals. And there are so many that the journalists should have had a field day. Why, in the rush to produce a vaccine, did the pharmaceutical companies force government to indemnify them against any compensation claims? Why did Pfizer try to hide the data for 75 years? Did they know all along of the potential side effects? Why did our medicines regulator, MHRA, change from being a watchdog to an enabler, their words not mine, to force the vaccine rollout? How can regulators really be independent when they're funded by the very people they're supposed to be regulating? rate is 86% funded by the pharmaceutical industry. That cannot be right. One in eight Pfizer's claim. Why did the MHRA accept the claims that the vaccine had an efficacy of 95% when it was actually less than 1%?
Well, negative.
Well, could be. Why were these treatments called vaccines in the first place, when clearly they were a brand new technology? Why did Chris Whittick and Patrick Vallance push so hard for herd immunity, then abruptly champion the jabs? None of these questions were asked by mainstream media, apart from GB News, who were doing a very brave job. And now we have the cover. The vaccination programme has clearly gone wrong. Around the world there are millions of reports of serious adverse reactions, some life-changing, some life-ending. Are you reading about it on our mainstream media, or watching it on mainstream media? Of course you're not. In this country alone, there have been 25,000 excess deaths since April. That's 25,000 more deaths than an average year since April. Many of them in the younger age groups. We've seen a bizarre list of reasons, but nobody who asks the question, is the jab to blame? It may not be, but it should at least be debated. The leading British cardiologist, Dr. Tissier, has produced a peer-reviewed and publicised paper calling for an immediate suspension of the Pfizer vaccine in conjunction with scientists at Harvard, Stanford and Oxford universities. He's presented evidence positively linking heart disease and heart deaths to the vaccine, including a terrible thing called myocarditis, which is affecting a lot of very unfortunate young men. Were his shocking findings reported in the media here? No. A group of MEPs called a press conference to question why excess deaths in Europe are running at 16%. And strangely enough, they're highest in those countries with the highest vaccination rates. Did you read about that here? No. So what's happened to our media? I'm a broadcaster, so I'm going to concentrate on television for a moment. Let's start with Ofcom. The regulator issued advice to broadcasters not to question public policy on COVID, with the threat of sanctions if they broke the rules. It wasn't actually worded quite like that, it was a bit more subtle, but that's what they meant. That instruction was issued to broadcasters on March the 23rd, 2020, which is the same day that the Nudge Unit drew up a policy for the government on lockdowns, and the same day that Boris Johnson told us all to stay at home, or people will die. That very same day, Ofcom issued that to the broadcasters. Now I'll ask them about that, and they say no, we're independent, and we do not take advice from any third party, including government. But it was the same day. Maybe it's a coincidence. The BBC took it with both hands and actually said on air, on Radio 5 Live, we do not debate with anti-vaxxers whether they are right or wrong. That is our editorial policy. I'm sorry, whether they're right or wrong. As a consequence, many people here went on these marches in London, which are fantastically supported, really emotional. Ordinary families, ordinary people, terrible anti-vaxxers. You know, as many as 100,000 possibly. It wasn't reported anywhere in mainstream media. Nor was the protest in Canada, or at least not as a protest. It was reflected as a militant rising, when in fact it was a fantastic protest against the draconian lockdown rules over there. Nor were the shootings in Australia or Belgium, where police shot their own citizens, their own residents, with rubber bullets, not seen here. Which brings me to something called the Trusted News Initiative, which in my view is one of the most dangerous things of all. It's a partnership between the BBC and one or two other media organisations over here, and the big tech companies. YouTube, said, it's an industry collaboration of major news and political tech companies working together to stop the spread of disinformation. What it actually is massive, massive censorship. And if they decide what the story is, and anybody that questions it, particularly on social media, is cancelled, is smeared, is their whole credibility is brought into question. They only want to put their side of the story. And if you trace it back, as they are in America, you will find that these big tech companies were in league with the American government. There have been 2 court cases recently. There's an organisation called Justice in the States, Justice Watch. They've just received 249 pages of official documents from a government agency. And it shows things like, it shows things how news broadcasters were sent packages of how to handle the COVID story. It's got details of how comedians were paid to make jokes about the anti-vaxxers. It's got evidence of how all of the major tech companies were persuaded to work with them. They actually call them partnerships on driving the COVID message and on suppressing any dissenting views. Now this is a partnership of these major tech companies working with the American agencies, working with the BBC. So do you really think it's not happening here? Do you really think that, as another line that they say that, make sure you place trusted messengers on talk shows, chat shows, daily shows, breakfast shows. You know, that's America. Do you really think it wasn't happening here? You know, the most interesting to me about the whole issue is how the world's governments and the world media put the same story in lockstep at every stage. It is not accidental. When I saw it on the BBC, which if you're in any doubt which side they're on, I've been working with Oracle Films on the Safe and Effective programme. We met a lot of vaccine injured people. They are physically injured, they're mentally injured, and even worse is the frustration of not being recognised and helped by the NHS or believed, they get accused of being mentally ill. So, to support each other, they form self-help groups. Facebook banned them with misinformation. So what they tried to do then was hide it by using emojis of a carrot instead of the syringe and other emojis. BBC spotted it and boasted in public, on air and in their website, that we've spotted this. It's disinformation. We have found out big tech partners, and it is being banned. How would they figure if it was the Summaries that they closed down? Because there's no difference. This is what you're paying a taxpayer's money for. In my opinion, it's being controlled. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much, Mark. Mark mentioned something called nudge, which David Sharman, I'm sure, is going to talk about. David is very much not in the government camp, so he is going to present his case as a fictitious character called James Block from the BIT, and I'll leave David to explain what the BIT is.
Hello, good evening all. Now, it is a disappointment that we couldn't get anyone to really be pro-narrative, but it's not surprising. I've challenged hundreds of doctors and scientists on all forms of social media politely to have a debate with myself or any of the scientists and academics that I consult to. And zero big fat zero acceptance. And if they were so keen that they were correct and the information was so true, then surely they would want to share that. So what we're seeing is a one-way movement of information, which is very problematic. We have doctors tweeting, they're able to just tweet whatever they want and hide behind the keyboard, and anything that they agree with is supported. If they're pro-narrative, and the other side is shut down. Debate's not easy, debate's not comfortable, but it's important. It's important to talk to those that don't agree with you. So on our project at Reaching People, reachingpeople.net, we have role plays, and we play Jane and Joe blocks, and I'm going to play Jane's block tonight. And Joe block, what we ask people to do is to step into Joe's shoes and to pretend to be pro-narrative. And people are absolutely shocked how easy it is to be pro-narrative, because there is a buffet of excuses there. There is an absolute wealth of information. At the first level, you go, oh, blah, 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 and then you're a conspiracy theorist, you're one of those. And it's only when you go to the second level where you start to really question things that you get to the truth. This is why debate is important, and this is why it's completely shut down. So tonight I'm James Blocks. And this is a Chomsky quote, and I think Chomsky should probably read some of his own books, judging by his actions in 2022, but he did say when he was really in his prime, if we don't believe in freedom of expression for people we despise, we don't believe in it at all. So I'm James Blogg, and I'm from the BIT. What is the BIT? It's the Behavioural Insights team. What do? They use behavioural science to influence the public. It's cool, isn't it? I don't know about the ethics. Okay, so there's a document called Mindspace, and you can Google Mindspace. You just type, well, not that you want to use Google, but maybe for this. Type in Mindspace government, you get a 90-page document on how the government gives to all its departments on how to influence the public, influencing behaviour through public policy. The 9 top ways that we can influence the public to comply. One of them is ego, they ban the ego. On page 66, we say the public won't be happy if they find out about it, but hey, for the greater good. On page 67, we talk about actually moving people's identity. Yes, that is possible if people aren't really critically thinking. Remember the clap into the sky? That was probably us. I've had my XYZ on the profile pictures. That was us. That was actually used by China at the prisoner of war camps. Very effective. But it's for the greater good. The toilet rolls. That was probably us. Scarcity drives up demand. So every single product that came out for the last 2 years was in short supply, wasn't it? But that's important because it was important to get compliance. If you bought more than you want, that was probably us as well. Intellectual freedom is the right of every individual to seek and receive information from all points of views with restriction. Yes, 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 but I think if you fact check that, you'll probably find it's false. So what is censorship? It's really individual groups or governments deciding what information is objectable or dangerous. And I think Mike alluded to it, but in the UK there isn't actually a specific law that free speech exists as a fundamental right, or so say Wikipedia. And I'm sure we can trust those guys. But as of 2022, Britain is ranked 35th on the Press Freedom Index. 35th. Well, there's 200 countries, so it's not too bad, right? So censorship. Censorship really is a blunt instrument. Okay? But with the BIT, it can become more of a scalpel. And really in censorship, there's 3 rules. The state doesn't get to call the shots. Okay? And anyone that says they are, that's just a conspiracy theory. Freedom comes first. I mean, just look at the glorious comrades such as Trudeau. And only censor to limit or prevent harm. Yeah, and, you know, we obviously don't want to harm corporate profits. So there's different types of censorship. One of the most important is actually self-censorship. And we don't realise how pervasive this is. When you get censored on Facebook and anyone else numerous times, you will sometimes think twice about some of the things you say. So we will tend to self-censor. And as Richard Werner, who has been censored more than most, who's an economics professor, the Bank of Japan used to send media, or still do, send all the media to the economics. And if anyone speaks out, they don't get invited next year. So all the media self-censors around finance. So anything that doesn't follow the party line, you won't see. Censorship is also by influence. And Cheryl Atkinson, in her really fantastic book, Slanted, showed that there was a couple of Boeing employees that approached her, and they said, Boeing's safety department are cutting corners. Huge story. She prepares it, it's going out Monday, Boeing lean on CBS, and they stop the story. Then 2 aircraft fall out of the sky, linked to that safety department. And that's the effect of the influence of big business on censorship. But then you've got the real main one that we're talking about tonight, and that's policy and false, and that's Ofcom and fact checkers and everything else. But we're proposing that we kind of need those. And of course, no one in the cult ever thinks of in the cult. So on to Mark Zuckerberg, he says that we err on the side of greater expression when it comes to censorship, and we remove content effectively. And they certainly do that. So there's really one important point that I think is really overlooked, and that is that Karl Popper argued that there is an asymmetry between falsification and verifiability. Now that sounds quite complex, and it is complex, but let's put it into a simple story. Let's say that my scientific theory is that there's no squirrels in my park. Okay? And I send 100 people there with cameras. They can be trusted, it's all monitored. They come back, 2 people have spotted squirrels in the park. Are there squirrels in the park? Yes. But if I censor those 2 people, there's no squirrels in the park. And 98% of people agreed. Okay? And that's what we see. It's about the amount of nodding dogs that we've got. And people go, so every single person is in on this. They don't have to be. Censorship removes the squirrels. So Voltaire said, if I can make you believe absurdities, then you commit atrocities. And that's why we really need censorship, to make sure that those absurdities are not put into people. So then the key really is that the foxes are not guarding the hen house. And I think that's up for people to decide who is guarding, who are the gatekeepers of information. So our proposal, well, laughably, is that there is no censorship, which I think is very hard to justify. But I think the real question is, can we justify the censorship that goes on? And I think that's what we're proposing. So thank you.
Thank you very much, David, or James Brooks, as I should say. And now I turn to Dr. Tissier, who needs no introduction. And when I was giving out leaflets, Fortnight's event in Chelsea and putting them through letterboxes, and many people came up to me and said, oh, I know Matt Tissier. He's the legend of Southampton. So I don't need to introduce him. Over to you.
Thank you very much. This is not my usual arena, so forgive me if I stutter a little bit. I want to take you a little bit through my journey over the last 2.5 years. I was never anybody who was politically minded at all, never really interested in politics throughout my entire life. That all changed in March of 2020 when the government started to decide soon found out that going against the government narrative came with it a lot of abuse. Now, when I first started tweeting about what was going on, I received a heck of a lot of abuse from what I thought were everyday people in the country. And I'm guessing some of those were, but it was only later on when I realised, I did a little bit of digging about the 77th Brigade and the bot funds that you get on social media, who are used to sway the narrative, to persuade people that everybody thinks this way. And I kind of realised pretty soon after that a lot of the stuff. And I stopped looking at the replies to my tweets. I would just drop the bomb and then walk away. And I found that very effective for my mental health. And I also found, after about 2 weeks of the first lockdown, the greatest thing that I ever did for me, my wife, and my daughter in my house was I switched off the television. I only watched sports programs, and then, sure enough, before too long, it was infiltrated sports programs. I had to sit there and watch footballers take the knee before football matches, and I spoke out about that as well. And that came, again, with another torrent of abuse because I refused to wear the Black Lives Matter badge on Sky Television. I was sacked about 2 or 3 months after that. Now, you can make your own mind up whether that had anything to do with it or not. I've got a fair idea. So, it was a journey that I kind of went on, which I never really expected to, as a former professional footballer. 17 years as a footballer and 15 years working in the media on Sky Sports. It was never something that I thought I would find myself in the middle of, but here we are, and I felt like these issues were too important to the future of my family, my children, for me to actually sit back and say nothing. I knew the consequences. I had a couple of warnings from Sky due to things that I tweeted going against the government narrative. So I kind of knew what was coming, and still, it was too important to me to not say anything and keep my job. Quite frankly, if I had to do the same thing again, I would do it, knowing the consequences now, and I feel a lot better actually as an individual that I don't have to rely on the mainstream media for my income, for my family. So that is a bit of a blessing in disguise. But it hasn't stopped the frustration of what I've seen going on around the world. And in those press conferences in the early days, when I kind of knew what was going on, I'm just a thick old footballer, and yet I was able to go decipher what was happening. I was able to look at those videos of the people in China falling over in the street, supposedly dead from COVID in a split second. I don't think I've ever seen anybody else do that, actually. Apart from on sports fields, when they've had vaccine. But that is a completely separate subject. But what frustrated me was watching our media in the press conferences, nobody challenging what the government was doing. In fact, not only are they not challenging, they're actually encouraging the government to lock us down for longer, lock us down for harder, and I can't tell you how much good it did me to turn the television off after those things. It really was quite remarkable. Now, all of this time, what people seem to forget, and what no journalist ever mentioned in those press conferences, is that I think it's about 3 days before we had our first lockdown, was that our government had classified this and taken it off the list of being a high consequence infectious disease. Now, they knew that it wasn't as deadly as they were telling us. They lied to us, and I do not ever want to hear that phrase that I heard just now, for the greater good. that has been the motto of every tyrannical government around the world that ever came in. So, the great good doesn't wash with me. I always think that the individual will always be far more powerful than the collective, because without individuals you don't have a collective. And for me, that is probably the most important thing that I've kind of learned. The behavioural insights team, I thought the way they went about things were disgusting, really, if I'm honest. The coercion, the bullying, the mental, if you don't do this, you're going to kill your granny. If you leave your house, everyone's going to die. I just thought that was the most inhumane thing I've ever seen. And these are the reasons why I've had to keep speaking out about the issues that have come up. Those issues started with the COVID stuff, with the BLM stuff, and then we moved on to the vaccine, which, as a layperson, full disclosure, I've had every childhood vaccine in my life. I took the flu vaccine until I was about 28, and then I had a bit of a bad reaction to it one year, so I never took it again. That was around 25 years ago. And I'll probably say my hand on my heart the last 25 years, I haven't had the flu either. So what these people have managed to do to me, as an individual who had trust in the medical professions, who had trust in government, who had trust in the legal professions, what this has done to me the last 2.5 years is taken away every single bit of trust I had in people. To the point of now, if somebody calls me an anti-vaxxer, I'll probably go, well, I'll be out now. Because of the lies, because of the research that I've now done, which I've never done before. I looked into the HPV vaccine. My daughter's 13 years of age, was offered this vaccine. That's been binned. I'm not going anywhere near that. Because of advice that I've taken from people who aren't involved in the pharmaceutical industry. I think that's the one thing I've kind of learned over the last couple of years as well, is that when you're listening to people, it's very difficult to disseminate who is telling the truth or not, and what is the truth. And for me, what I've learned to do is not just listen to what people have got to say, but also try and find out what conflicts of interest they've got when they're saying it, because we don't get told that. See, I believe if anybody is going on television and they're giving advice to the general public, I think, just like the footballers and their sponsors across the front of their shirt, anybody who's going to go on the television needs to let everybody know where their conflicts of interest are, who funds them, and then we can then make up our own mind as people, as citizens of this country. We can make up our own mind whether or not we trust you, given what we know about your conflicts of interest. I think that's a really important point. And there is censorship, without any shadow of a doubt. I was listening to Talk Sport one morning, the day after another footballer had collapsed on the pitch clutching his arm. And during the Jim White show, Trevor Sinclair and Simon Jordan both expressed an opinion that they thought there needed to be some kind of investigation, because these players are collapsing on the fields of play and nobody seems too bothered about it. I was a professional footballer for 17 years, hand on my heart, I never saw one player in my entire career in 17 years, that's not just matches, I'm talking about training 5 days a week for 17 years. Not one player did I see with a heart problem. Not one. Now, all these players start collapsing on the pitch. Trevor Sinclair happens to bring up the subject and questions why nobody is being interested in investigating this. Halfway through his sentence, his microphone got cut off. Live, on air, microphone cut. He was not allowed to speak about that subject anymore. Now that is irrefutable that censorship would have come from Ofcom, and if you don't think that the government has told them to do that, I'm sorry, you're living on a different planet. The media are being so complicit in all this. I believe they're controlled by the same entities that control our government. I don't think there's any difference whatsoever. I think we can see that by the fact that they have pretty much all of them, apart from GP News, all of them, of the mainstream media, have shunned every single person that has been injured or died of this vaccine. Every single one. None of them can get a slot on BBC or ITV to tell their story about what they're, and these people are hurt. I've sat in a meeting this afternoon at Parliament, in Portguy's house, where Dr. Azima Hotri gave a presentation, and in amongst the crowd were a lot of the vaccine injured. And these people are crying out for some help and just to be noticed, and our media have completely turned their back on them. I spoke, Lisa Shaw, who worked for the BBC, one of their own. She died last May, and it is now October 2022. She died May 2021. I spoke to her husband today. Despite the fact that the vaccine manufacturer is on her death certificate, despite that fact, they still won't pay him out from the vaccine compensation scheme. Absolutely disgusting. This is, and it appears that the tactics from these people are that we will stretch out as far as we can and hope people get fed up and don't keep badgering us for the £120,000. I'm sorry, that's not good enough in this day and age. And quite frankly, the media in this country have got a lot to answer for. I think they could have, if we had a independent media, this crisis would have been over about 2.5 years ago. So, I appreciate your points over the other side of the room. I'm telling you, there is censorship, it's going on, it's disgusting, and it's at a level that's going to be dangerous for this country, especially with the bills that they've got trying to come through, the online health safety bill, all that kind of stuff. It is dangerous, and it is taking you down a road. I'm not saying that this government is tyrannical, they might be. What I'm saying is, all these bills that they're going to try and put through, they put in place the mechanisms for a tyrannical government to come in and take advantage of those laws. So we should never ever bring those laws in. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much, Matt. Very, very much appreciated. I just want to say that the purpose of this evening obviously is to unearth these things and to point out that this is not a battle of conspiracy theorists. Mark has been running ITN, Sky News, Matt is a respected footballer, Godfrey was an MEP for 10 years. And on this side, they're also not conspiracy theorists. Mike is an architect, David Sharman is an expert on psychology and talks about psychological practices, and Gloria Moss was a professor at the university. So I'm also a local councillor, and none of us are conspiracy theorists. And the purpose of tonight, which is to unearth what is actually happening in our society and present it to people who've been under the influence of what Mark and Matt has been saying, namely the BBC and the orthodox media. And this is why we want to set up an independent channel to present what is actually going on in our society. Right, the next person who's going to speak, if I get this, is Professor Sleepy University.
Thank you so much, Chairman. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Let me introduce myself. As the Chair has told us, I am Professor Sleepy from Cambridge University. Now, as you know, universities play a pivotal role salaries exceeding £500,000 per annum. So it is critical to keep these institutions alive. And here in Britain, since government funding to universities has more than halved in the last 14 years, we encourage our academics here at Cambridge University to reach for the stars and to ensure that Cambridge remains viable to continue educating and shaping the minds of current and future generations. And we are very proud here at Cambridge that all of our professors will bring in funding of at least £200,000 per annum. And much of their work is centred on extremely important subjects, as I'm sure you will all agree today. So just to give you a glimpse this evening. So one of the areas that our academics look after is the safety of our citizens. And one of our professors, originally hailed from the Netherlands, he's now investigating how an online game that he has created can actually trigger mental antibodies that will arm players against disinformation. And this vital research, I'm sure you would all agree, is funded by the Department for Homeland Security in the US and the Behavioural Insights team, which my colleague David here mentioned earlier, in Britain. And incidentally, all these examples I'm giving you tonight are not fiction. They're actually real research projects. A second stream of research comes from government research grants. And several of our academics have been successful in competitive rounds of applications. Now, one is, let me look at my notes here, yes, one is Professor Coffin, who won an Economic and Science Research Council, that's the ESRC, government grant for a project entitled Learning to Like Robots. Now, another professor, Professor Vapid, yes, Professor Vapid, he won a substantial grant for research on low-carbon trade opportunities. And I've only got time to mention a few tonight. Professor Globalizer, he won a project entitled Attracting International Students to the UK. Yes, having a high percentage of overseas students may exclude UK students from our doors, but as you may know, overseas fees are twice those that we secure from domestic students, and you'll appreciate that the university must keep afloat in order to carry on its important mission. Now, the third area of research that I'd like to draw to your attention this evening is thanks to the ongoing support of the Hilda and Will Gates Foundation, which is funding a very large number of scholars here at our University of Cambridge, science professors, as well as building projects right across the campus. Now, initiatives such as these ensure the viability of Cambridge, allowing our academics to continue their good work. We must, however, be ever vigilant. One of our world-renowned biochemistry professors, an expert on aluminium, was called out for misinformation in his claims that aluminium in vaccines could be toxic to human health. He had brought in over £2 million in funding during his career with us, but we had to, I'm sure you'll appreciate, we had to react quickly and take down his funding website. And very regrettably, he had no option but to resign. And when another professor, professor this time of ethics, refused to conform to the vaccine mandate in 2021, we had to regrettably let her go. And yes, there was a third case, which involved a professor of management and marketing who undertook research on a very human and motivational form of leadership that engages with people on an individual basis and grows their confidence and talents and provides intellectual stimulation. Now, what this professor's research clearly revealed was how this human, very humane form of leadership could boost productivity, mental well-being, and motivation in a way that the authoritarian style that is present in much of our senior management team cannot. So we had to stop her from fulfilling a commission to write an article about her research for the main newspaper for universities globally. If we hadn't stopped her, her article on best practice leadership would have exposed us as the worst kind of leaders, and the university's reputation would have suffered. We had a bit of bother with this professor because she stated that stopping her article breached her academic freedoms, and she maintained that academic freedoms were absolutely essential in guaranteeing the impartiality of a university's work. Well, we got around this by claiming over an extended period of time that the timing of her article was not right, and the fight was pursued into the courts. And, well, if you would like to read more about this, you can read about it in this absolutely dreadful book called The Dark Side of Academia, How Truth is Suppressed, which I regret to say is available and also on Amazon. Moving on swiftly. We have many challenges, but we are particularly proud of two things. Firstly, our record on peer review. The government, the British government, runs an assessment exercise every 7 years or so, and assesses the value of the research done in all the universities of this country. And in the most recent exercise, they laid down a rule that the only articles, peer-reviewed articles that they would consider, we're talking articles reviewed by peers, very learned peers, and they said that the only articles that the government would consider, and all these articles would attract funding, the only articles they would consider were those articles published in the so-called top journals. Yes, there's a league table of journals, as there is of everything else in our world today. And the highest ranking journals are the 4-star journals. And I'm very proud to say that a number of our fine academics here at Cambridge published many articles in 4-star journals. So just to give you a flavour for some of this exciting work, I'm going to give you the absolute verbatim titles of these articles. So sit tight. Here's the first one. Knowledge Leadership and the Mobilisation of Management Research, Becoming the Object of Knowledge. Surely we'll all be rushing off to read that one. Here's another one. The Nature and Transformation of Corporate Headquarters, a review of recent literature and a research agenda. That was co-authored by a learned colleague from our institution, together with one from Oxford University. And here is a third title, again in a 4-star journal. High-flying business schools, working together to address the impact of management education and research on climate change. So I'm very proud of these contributions. And yes, you might be thinking there are voices, including the voices of very senior editors of medical journals such as The Lancet, The British Medical Journal, the New England Medical Journal, who have thrashed the value of peer review. And I even recall a Nobel Prize winner, Sidney Brenner, who described peer review as a completely corrupt system. I even read recently an article in the thinking man's newspaper, The Guardian, recounting how the man behind the whole edifice of peer review was Robert Maxwell. Well, with fake news and disinformation rampant and people questioning mainstream narratives, it is now more important than ever for higher education to double down on dissent and wrong thinking and to ensure that the correct single worldview prevails. I'm sure you will agree with that. Now, we're coming to the end of our time. Just want to highlight the second area that we are extremely proud of here at Cambridge University. And it is, of course, our membership of the WEF, Global University Leaders Forum. Yes, the WEF, the World Economic Forum, is, as we know, the Davos-based group led by Klaus Schwab that advocates for the Great Reset, or the Fourth Industrial Revolution, that includes important initiatives such as the Internet of Things, AI, transhumanism, and the WEF tell us on many an occasion that people will end up owning nothing, but nevertheless be completely happy. So the WEF, Global University Leaders Forum, includes, apart from Cambridge University, which I'm proud to lead, it includes some of the world's leading universities. For example, from Britain, there's Cambridge, there's Oxford, and from the US, there are a very large number of Ivy League universities, including Harvard, Yale, and Stanford. And this forum is something we're very proud of because it affords valuable opportunities to pilot educational modules and joint research to ensure that we have a coherent source of truth across the university establishment. And if you'd like to learn more about the work of universities and the WEF, you can look on the WEF website and find an article written in 2020, I think it was, by a senior professor from Oxford University, Pro-Vice-Chancellor for External Affairs, no less, as well as one from Queensland, in which they expressed the view that the role of teaching and research is to, and I quote, produce models and policies to assist the Great Reset. So Cambridge University is dedicated, as you can see, to keeping education alive. And in doing this, we must safeguard the well-being and safety of our staff and students. And this is one of the reasons why we used prevent legislation to shut down, very recently, a talk on the scientific importance of free speech. That was the title of the talk, The Scientific Importance of Free Speech. That was due to be given to the Libertarian Society by a psychology lecturer. But the talk was deemed high risk since it could have caused disruption. So bringing this to an end, I can do no better, really, than to quote the wise words of Jacinda Ardern. Only a few weeks ago, and some of you I'm sure will have heard her speech to the United Nations, in which she said, we must be ever alert to misinformation that could be used, these are her words, as weapons of war to cause chaos. And it is only by being alert that top universities like Cambridge can continue to offer valued education to present and future generations. And of course, we support the proposition that there is absolutely no censorship
Cambridge University. That was extremely interesting. And I hand over now to Godfrey Bloom, who knows a great deal about the World Economic Forum. Over to you,
Good evening, everybody. I just sort of making some notes here as the previous speakers have gone through, and just thought I might just tell you a little bit about my experiences. Well, take you back, if I may, to 1963, when I was a young fellow, as a schoolboy. I used to wander across Tower Bridge to watch the speakers on the free speech corner of Tower Hill, Speaker's Corner there, which Lord Sober used to speak at every lunchtime. And he used to be quite an interesting fellow. I didn't agree with most of what he said, but he was an inspiring speaker. And the concept of free speech then was sort of drilled into me. I couldn't be more than about 13 or 14. But when I got a little bit older, I went up to Hyde Park Corner to listen to the speakers there. And what was particularly interesting about the speakers at Hyde Park Corner, they could attract quite big crowds in those days, and they would there'd be people from all over the world. There'd be people from all over the world watching the speakers just stand on a box with maybe one, maybe two policemen, no more. And they found it was fascinating. They came from countries where they didn't have free speech. And at Hyde Park Corner in those days, in the late 1960s and early 70s, the whole concept of Speaker's Corner was that you could say exactly what you liked. Whatever you liked, as long as you weren't inciting violence, anything went. All right? And people stood awestruck that that could happen, and that could be so. And that was wonderful. Fast forward until just a couple of years ago, when I saw a Christian padre arrested for quoting the Bible. That's how far we have come. That's how far, with moronic policemen standing around, arresting him and letting people reading from anything else that they want to do, the Quran, for example, which, funnily enough, says a lot of the same things as the Bible in certain parts, we're allowed to get away with that. Now, if you can't quote the Bible, if you're in a Christian country, at Hyde Park Corner, I think we've come to a very sorry pass. It's a very, very sad thing, in my view. And the fact that it can happen is because we have a politicised police force. And if you look at what they actually get taught at police college these days, you'll see exactly why that is. Now, a few years ago, I was invited to speak to the Cambridge University Conservative Association. And I went there to go and speak on libertarianism, in point of fact. And a year later, I was invited back to speak at their dinner. And the theme of the speech after dinner was going to be the government of Lord Salisbury in the 1890s, which Clement Attlee reckoned was the most successful Conservative government that we've ever had. I don't think anybody would possibly suggest that isn't so, especially today. It was a wonderfully successful government. I thought it very interesting because if you look at Lord Salisbury's quotation, he was a libertarian, funnily enough. A lot of the stuff he did was very, very libertarian. And 2 days before I was due to get there, I was deplatformed. It was Robinson College. And they were very clever. They didn't censor me. They didn't say, Mr. Bloom can't come and speak. They said to the Conservative Association, you have to make sure there's enough security there to defend the students. What they thought I was going to do, I really can't say. But they wanted, they said, and of course the Conservative Association, they got a quotation from G4 or somebody, or Security Corps or something, whatever it was, and it was £4,000 or £5,000, which blew it out of the water. But of course the Conservative faculty, the faculty of Robinson College said, oh, we didn't deplatform Mr. Bloom, we didn't say he couldn't come. All we said was that the Conservative Association would have to make it secure for our students, and so we asked them to pay for the security. Well, that's as good as cancelling. That's censorship. That's censorship. So I was censored off. It was the same thing when I went to Stirling University in the frozen north, and I went up there to give a lecture on how Scotland could be comfortably independent if they adopted Austrian school economics, Oh, no. No, that's far too tough for the Scots up there, so I was deplatformed there. We had to find another venue, which of course it was a campus university, cut it down by half, cut the audience down by half. I was deplatformed at Durham University. I can't remember why. I must tell you this, at Scotland University, I said, why did they deplatform me at Stirling University? And do you know what the answer was? We didn't know what he was going to say. So I was censored before opening on. Then it was Somerville College when somebody said, who was a libertarian, they said, I'd like Godfrey to come and speak to us. I thought this was top stuff because it was like turning into White's Club. Now, I'm far too common to go into White's Club. But Somerville's College for not letting me speak there was because I wasn't a proper chap. So obviously I'm not a proper chap. And so there was no reason given at all, I just wasn't allowed to speak there. And so it goes on, the list goes on and on. I've spoken at Cambridge Union, I've spoken at the Oxford Union, that the unions haven't given me a problem. It's when speaking at the colleges, and it's sometimes started by the faculty, and it's sometimes started by the NUS, who get the ball rolling. Now, the motion, let's just have a look at the motion here, because what we're actually looking at, do we have censorship in the UK? And we've talked a lot about government, or some of the opposition there, or the proposers have talked about that. It isn't as simple as that, is it? It isn't really as simple as that. It's not to do with the government. It's to do with the whole deep state machinery. And sometimes the Americans get these things so right, don't they? Deep state, what a wonderful expression that is, because I think it sums it up for all of us. Deep state. And the government can actually pressure in a million ways. The establishment can pressure in a million ways. So, for example, just chucking them around. Climate change, for example. As soon as the older members will remember David Bellamy and Joe Ball, whatever his name was, I can't remember Ball. Anyway, they said, just a minute, no, carbon dioxide in the atmosphere has got absolutely nothing to do with the weather, or we're all going to boil to death. We're not having it that. They were immediately sacked by the BBC because that was against the government rhetoric. So they were got rid of, and instead they brought in a man, Roger Harrabin, who was an activist. He's not a scientist. He's just an activist, a green activist, and he's been there almost up until just the last year. So all these little things go together, and then you find Classic FM. If you listen, I used to listen to Classic FM. You would be stunned at how much money they get for the government for those government statements. Well, it doesn't matter whether it's about COVID, whether it's about getting jabbed, whatever it happens to be. That's a very big budget. So they virtually bought Classic FM, lock, stock and barrel, so they can turn that particular tap off. We don't get anybody who can counter-argument. It has to be, I've been taken down by Twitter, and I've been taken down by Facebook, because of all the very wealthy oligarchs in the world only need a nudge from government, and of course all governments are saying the same thing. You never get a balanced approach, and of course somebody mentioned the BBC Charter, and the BBC Charter is to inform and entertain. It does neither. It does neither. It's repeat after repeat after repeat, if you look through it. It just repeats. And of course it doesn't inform. Otherwise we were being told that it's not a vaccine, it's experimental spike protein therapy, which is, but don't call it a bloody vaccine. It's not a vaccine. And that word should be got rid of immediately. That should be censored off. Let me censor that word off, vaccine. Not a vaccine. Another word I'd like to censor off, of course, is free. Free. Oh, we believe in free this and free that, and it's free at the point of delivery. It's free, free, free. No, let's change that to taxpayer funded, because that's the truth about it. The government doesn't have money. It's taxpayer funded. So let's have that phrase stopped. So we stop this drip, drip feed all the time of propaganda. Propaganda brings me on to Joseph Goebbels. I decided that it might be a good idea if I looked out and found out how it was done. So I looked at his biography, and basically, to paraphrase what he said, first of all, you have to instill fear in the population. You must instill fear. That's primarily the first thing that you do. Then you must have one message. You must have one message. Doesn't matter how absurd it is, you have one message which appeals to emotion. You will get nowhere, Goebbels said, if you try and appeal to fact. Fact is no good. It doesn't motivate humankind. Fact is something that maybe a small percentage of the population, 15 or 20% of the population, are interested. Everybody here tonight is interested in fact. You are one of the 20%. Everybody else is not. They are interested in emotion. And this is what drives people, and this is the problem. And this is the problem we have turning it round. If you ask the man on the Clapham omnibus how the war between the Russian Federation started and the Ukraine, they will tell you that Putin woke up one morning with a sore head. He'd been upon the piss the night before. He was bald stiff and he thought, I know what I'll do today, brighten myself up. I'll invade the Ukraine. 80% of the people in this country believe that to be true. 80%. They don't know anything about the history of the Ukraine. They couldn't point to the Ukraine on the map. They couldn't tell you about the history of the Ukraine. They know absolutely nothing about it. Now, I'm not making a case for the Russian Federation. I'm not making a case for anybody. What I'm saying is, shouldn't we have a balance if the BBC is going to inform and entertain? Shouldn't there be a balance? But they closed Russia Today down, so we're only hearing one voice, and they closed down Russia Today and think, oh, well, that's the voice of the Russian government. Well, what's the bloody BBC if that's not the voice of the British government? So we're not getting a balanced thing. So people who are masked, they cover their face with masks, some of them still are with a mask all over their face, double jabbed, quadruple jabbed, terrified of COVID with a 99.9% recovery rate, totally relaxed about a nuclear war. Not bothered about a nuclear war. Presumably they think it's a 99.9% recovery rate from a nuclear war. Or you can have a booster against it. Drip all the time. It's got to be the same message and it appeals to the emotion. But he said, and this is the key thing Goebbels said, dissent is not allowed. You're not allowed dissent because the man in the pub who reads the Daily Express is probably not very bright, but he's entitled to his point of view. So he's at the pub and he gets the Daily Express view, he gets the BBC view and everything, he gets the Sky view and everything, which is the same message all the time. Now, that man could actually listen to somebody articulate putting another side of the case. Somebody like Piers Corbyn, I can see lurking over there. He should be on. Professor Clymer from Australia should be put on to have a look at the other side. So you've got people who actually believe there's a climate emergency. Bloody hell, 30 years I've been listening to this. 30 years we've had a climate emergency, but who do we get advocating it? We get the little bloody Swedish doom goblin turning and saying, we don't get the scientists, we don't get people who know what they're doing, we get that funny little girl, and we get man King Ludwig of Bavaria, who's now Charles III. I don't know what happens to Charles' head if you're Charles #1, they can knock a couple of things off there, in my view. So, we're just not getting any truth, we're not getting any balance. It's covert censorship, it's censorship by oppression, it's censorship by omission all the time. And of course it's not just here, it's in America all the time. I visit America quite a lot. It's just the same there. I was doing a podcast thing in Pennsylvania thing the other night, and somebody was complaining on the podcast thing that their daughter had been dragged in on a Monday. This is not a state school, this is a private school, to be frightened to death about climate emergency. He's paying money for that. Which would be bloody hell, homeschooling for me straight away, that would be. So we're just not getting the balance. We're not getting the balance, and we do bring some of this on ourselves, if you don't mind me suggesting it. We do bring some of this on ourselves, don't we? If you pay the BBC, you are covered. Right? If you pay, if you haven't cancelled your banker's order and you haven't stopped sending your check, you are responsible. So if you are anybody in this room, stop it. And if we all stopped it, something would be done. wife is a medic, and she can't understand it either. She did her dissertation to qualify on actually the long-term use of masks, believe it or not, on the face of how dangerous they were. So she's never worn a mask, I've never worn a mask, we don't bother, and incidentally when lockdown came along, we built a micro park on my little small holding in East Yorkshire, and half the village turned up every Friday night here to sleep. So we didn't bother with lockdown, we haven't bothered with the jab, we haven't bothered with masks. It's up to us, isn't it? It's extraordinary, isn't it? But there we are. That is what I think we need to do. We need to take it in our own hands. We can't wait for government. We have this WF, it's global. What I want to see, it can start if we take a grip, if the people take a grip. They need to get rid of Mark Rutte in Holland, they need to get rid of Macron, they need to get rid of Trudeau. If these people aren't there, they can't impose WF strategy upon us. You will own nothing and you'll be happy. At the moment, they're working really hard to make sure you own nothing. I don't think we're going to be happy.
Thank you very much, Godfrey. That was very, very interesting. And what we would like to do now is open it to the floor, and I hope people would like to make their comments. Oh, yeah.
Just check this is okay.
Yeah, thank you. Godfrey, wonderful.
You want us to use?
Yes, I did.
Yes. That one.
I didn't like what you were going to say.
Hello?
It's excellent points, Godfrey, very profound as well. Just a couple of points under the microscope. This man, the Blofeld, the Goldfinger of this whole operation, von Schwab. I mean, the other day I was listening to him speaking, he was saying that we must merge the physical with the biological and the technical. This man is clinically insane, and yet he is able to manipulate, he somehow permeated the governments. I do not know how. I realise I'm speaking to the camp here, but basically, a few philosophical points about censorship. I think when they kicked us out of America, I think Washington and the Pilgrim Fathers got it right. They had free speech protected by law. You had no psychological torment. You didn't say what you wanted with the fear of prosecution when they promoted that Thomas Paine wonderful book, Common Sense, to the Americans. And also censorship is subjective. We know in the early 60s, I think it was, there was a Lady Chatterley's Lover trial, which now is considered to be an English classic. At the time, it was considered to be obscene. And when we talk about freedom, I think we should say freedom from what and freedom to what. And I think the greatest freedom, I think as Bertrand Russell said, is the freedom to change one's own mind. And there should always be freedom, philosophical points, to ask questions, and freedom to give answers and to answer subsequent questions on those answers. And finally, yeah, I think that's about it. But thanks, great evening and very entertaining. Thank you. Anyone else?
What about the progress towards digital society? I can't think of the name. Digitalisation, cash versus card. Sorry, not a word.
CBDCs.
What is it?
Central banking, digital currencies.
Central banking, digital
currency and central banking. The attempt to abolish cash, which is continual. Everybody should go around with cash and not use cards.
That's right.
I'll agree with that.
I think I'm reasonable.
Well said. On just the subject of censorship, wasn't mentioned about the police crime sentencing bill. Recently, I was obviously on a lot of the marches that were hidden, and I was obviously seeing what I was seeing with my own eyes. It was an amazing experience, to be honest with you, to see so many people that were waking up to the tyranny that was going on. But if there was no such thing as censorship from the government, why are they trying to prevent our protests taking place? And when we think about it, every single right that we have today that we take for granted, okay, human rights, civil rights, workers' rights, women's rights, LGBT rights, they came from people like us who stood up to this nonsense and got those rights that were taken away at one point or stolen from us. And they're never anyone's to have it other than their own. We have to take our sovereign rights back. And if we don't stand together in unity and we argue and bicker about black, white, rich, old, young, poor, all those kind of issues that they use against us to conquer and divide, the future's going to look dark. So I applaud everyone here today and thank you all for every little bit of energy you put into making our voices heard. Thank you.
Yes. Hello. Yes, I'm Piers Colby from various places. Been arrested 15 times. Since May the 16th. Yes, well, amazing speeches, fantastic. But since we're in a debating chamber, I wanted to propose a procedural motion, namely that, because we all know that we are being censored, that this motion be not put, and instead we have a simple motion that this House commits to build alternative independent media and destroys the mainstream media propaganda machine of the New World Tyranny. I think that sounds good. But to clarify that, it was mentioned earlier that the mainstream don't accept anti-vaxxers, and of course they don't accept people that speak the truth about climate. In fact, they don't accept anybody that speaks the truth about any of the 6 legs of the New World Tyranny, namely the virus con, the climate con, the war con, the jab programming going on now, the 5G towers, and of course the digital and biometric ID. All of those things won't get discussed, and we have to discuss them all. And, you know, when we're going out on the streets, I'm happy to report that now the number of people that walk up to us and say you're absolutely mad and dangerous and should be locked up has decreased. But there are still some, and, you know, they're really, actually, to my mind, insane. But you see, they fear their whole narrative and worldview being taken away. And then when we warn them that they've had the jab and it might kill them, they're obviously going to be upset and don't want to believe it. So, you know, we have a massive job, but it is to deal with a decreasing number. So the question arises, how the hell did the powers that be get into this position? I mean, it's amazing what they've achieved. And I think one of the answers is given by a UN representative going to the World Economic Forum, said, we own the science. So they just lie and lie and lie and do not allow any alternatives to come forward. And you see, as Rosa Luxemburg said, freedom of speech belongs to the minority. It doesn't mean anything to the majority. And that, of course, is what the powers that be know. So they're definitely committed to suppressing us. But one of the dangers we've got to face is hidden censorship and self-censorship. See, for example, hidden censorship. A lot of this has been building up for a while. It's not just these last 2 years. ClimateGate, University of East Anglia, the leakage of the stuff where they hid the decline in temperatures. I won't go into detail, but there was one email revealed which said, we are going to prevent Piers Corbyn or any of his mates ever getting anything published in any mainstream peer-reviewed proper journal. That's what they said in your email. The same people in public were saying, Piers, why don't you publish what you've got about long-range weather forecasting? We all want to know. Okay. So they were setting a trap. They were going to get me to try and publish, and they say it was refused, you see, to try and, you know, destroy what we were saying. But the other self-censorship comes from, you know, Twitter and so forth. You see, I had 40,000 Twitter followers cut off. I've now got a new trick they call @RealPiers called it, by the way. But you see, when I started getting nervous. Well, what can I say? What can I not say? Or am I going to be told again? Now I've just said, fuck it, I'm just going to say it. But, you see, that is the point. We are self-censoring ourselves all the time. All the time. And we've got to get out of that, which is why we do have to really build, alternatives. We have here UNN, Unity News Network. We've also got Corrupt Not Political. Correct Not Political. Or whatever you call yourself now. I need to change the name a few times. There's various groups, and we really have to build them, amazingly. And I think the thing we do have to understand is that yesterday's conspiracy theory is today's truth.
I just sort of came in here by chance, random. But the question is, the question is, does the government censor things? Yeah, of course they do. It's like, Matthew Tissier might be in football, but it's like they say in, horse racing. You can't make a bad horse win, but you can stop a good horse from winning. And when the government sees a story, and that story might blow the cover off the exposure, they turn around and say, well, you know what, this horse ain't going to win today. So basically speaking, the only way that you can make a bad horse win is to stop a good horse from winning.
Just to answer Jeremy, you say they own the science. They also own the truth. And that's a dangerous thing. They think they own the truth. And that's why any dissenting voice...
That's what they mean when they say that.
But I don't know whether you're aware, but Sky Television had an initiative on climate change, which they worked out with their friends at Big Tech and also the BBC. And basically they've signed up to a programme of placing climate change stories and across all aspects of broadcasting. So they've talked about what kind of stories should be carried in the news, what length of story should be carried in the news, what type of presenters should give that climate change news, and how long the pieces should run, and what their emphasis should be. But that also extends to soaps and radio shows like The Archers, and even to motoring shows where they've suggested that they should feature electric vehicles. Worst of all, it extends to children's programs, and because they say, we need to get children on side because they are the future. But again, they're only being told one side of the story. It includes all kinds of things like product placement. They set out basically to have three objectives: to get people to travel less, to eat less meat, and I think to use less fuel and energy. And there was a lot of product placement. Now, Laura Dodsworth and Toby Young complained to Ofcom and said this breaks your code on about 10 different aspects. And Ofcom said, sorry, it's not a political issue, the science is settled.
That's the point, yeah.
One of the most sinister and worrying aspects of the crushing of debate and freedom of speech is the development by the police of what might be called punishment by process. That means you haven't committed a crime, but you're treated as though you have. And the big example of that is the recording of non-crime hate incidents, where people are detained and it's put on a register that they've committed something that is against the law, but it's recorded as though it has. I mean, that is so sinister. So you can't even rely, your case doesn't even go before the court. And if you've committed, as far as the state is concerned, you've committed an offence.
Well, I just pick up on that because that's a good point, and it started in my backyard in Humberside with the chief constable there. There was a case, it was decided just a few months ago that constables wrongly had to take it all off the records of Humberside Police. Now, I don't know whether that's behind across other police forces, but in my backyard it's been stopped. It's been stopped at a high court level. So I just thought I'd just bring that fact, if you didn't know that, I want to bring it to your attention, but you're quite right, it was disgraceful. Disgraceful.
That's interesting.
Yeah, just a couple of brief points just to reiterate what Piers was saying, and this is to everyone who's been on the freedom movement over the last year. I'm a former soldier, I was in the Falklands War 40 years ago. Every guy I served with, I know we all fought for a free society. We used to talk about democracy, what it means. None of us wanted a police state. All I'd like to say is I served with some brave men then, and I've been on the demos over the last few years with some extremely brave men and women up against violent thugs in this so-called police force who have been smashing people over the head with iron maces. Unbelievable in October 2020. Much worse, I've seen them psyching themselves up in Trafalgar Square, like making monkey noises. Far worse than anything I did in infantry training before the Falklands War. I've never seen anything like it. The police need a good sorting out. Particularly talk about politicised policing. Rotherham happened, Telford happened because the police are politicised. They were more interested in filling in community cohesion statistics than looking after young kids, for God's sake, you know. And secondly, a point on censorship, final point. George Orwell, that wonderful guy who wrote those books, I think, not just as stories, but as a warning what can happen in a totalitarian regime. It can happen in a communist socialist state, and it can happen also in a capitalist state for the simple reason that there's profit motive to edge people on. And one final point about censorship. Well, censorship means that we often see and hear things we don't want to see. I'll give you an example of the Vietnam War. People around at the time probably remember those pictures of the little children burning alive with napalm. Terrible as those photographs were, they started the massive anti-war movement that led to the end of the Vietnam War. So, you know, for all intents and purposes, they had a good outcome. It led to the end of the Vietnam War. That's censorship. Thank you.
It's just really bizarre how we got where we are. Tissier was saying that bills are now in place where basically it's turnkey tyranny which can be put in place, if not now, then in the future. I'm really stunned by don't exactly remember the name of the act, but the Covert Human Intelligence Act, where government departments, all kinds, the most innocuous ones even, DEFRA or Department of Education, DOE, probably, it's insane the number of government departments are allowed to commit crimes in order to surveil the populace or whatever they need to do. So, and these are serious crimes. So, you know, how does Parliament agree? There was only one dissenting MP that I remember against this, who spoke out. But it's just amazing that how can they say that we will be allowed to commit crimes when they're the Parliament, when they are meant to be the top legal body of the country. So it's a really bizarre. It happened last year, it was passed. It's not been used, it's there. So many of us are campaigning against 5G. And so these people, in the past, it was a green movement where they were infiltrated. I don't know if you remember the case where policemen pretended to be in relationships on the campaigners, raised families, had kids, and then suddenly left. And these women were totally betrayed. And worse can happen, we remember from COINTELPRO in the US. So we have got, I think we can say, no, conspiracy theory, I don't think we shy away from it really, it's conspiracy fact, people conspire. Governments are corrupt, there is corruption. You were saying that, you know, people should have these logos plastered on their suits when they go into Parliament, like racing drivers, that they belong to Shell or whoever. It's all very much gained. So how do we go forward? Because any body that we speak to, they will either ignore or they do things that are completely antithetical to what they say, what we're about, what Britain's about, what freedom's about. Yet they use those terms.
They're actually really good points, and that's essentially the project that we're working on, which is reaching people, which is why do people believe what they believe? Why do they, when you talk to someone, you bring up these complex things, they shut you down. And I think it's because what's happened with the Day for Science is about a decade or two ago, they stopped listening to what people said and started watching what they did. So there's many myths of behaviour that we have as humans, in the way that we've been schooled, We don't really understand how we function, but behavioural science really does now. That's why this is one of the really key points to understand. And when we're talking to people, I mean, Jeremy talked about cognitive dissonance. When you understand that detail, it's so important because it's been weaponized. This information has been weaponized. Every single state on this planet now has a nudge unit. Okay? And what most people don't understand in the public is they can be influenced without their consent or knowledge. And what happens is when they're spouting their pre-prepared script, such as I've been blah 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 3 times, I caught it, but thank God, otherwise it would have been much worse. They're not aware they're not their words. They're placed there. And when they do realise they're not their words, they're going to be really angry. And that's why, for me, this is the piece that's missing from everything, is how do we talk to people? How do we have an open and honest conversation without it turning into a divide and conquer? And the conditions have been placed there that this is absolutely impossible. I had a client this afternoon who is a chiropractor, absolutely lovely lady, and she's been shut down that she mustn't talk to her patients about informed consent on anything that they want. And she took the charter in that says, look, at the top it says, but her boss shut her down. And this is what we really have to understand, and we have to understand how we function, why we behave the way we do, why is there 10% of people that are immune to this, but it's really how, and I talk about, how do we reach the middle paths? And this, it is a complex thing, but I think with a bit of understanding of this, for me, the behavioural science answers those questions. It answers all the questions that you have. If you read that Mindspace document, things would start to make sense. There's various books on this. But this is what's happened. Yeah, this is how the information is weaponized to actually control people's minds. Because in a dictatorship, you're controlled by force. But in a democracy, you're controlled by influence in the public, mostly without their consent. And so I think that's the key.
Excellent opportunity this, but I don't know whether this will help. But very often, and I think it's the subject of the debate this evening, to put the other side of the case. In other words, to say, yes, there is freedom of speech, and I think that's what we should do. We should say, yes, there is freedom of speech in this UK, in the world. Mr. Gates and Mr. Fauci and all those other people who are running the world, they seem to have freedom of speech, okay? So why shouldn't we? And surely if we could make that point, people will begin to maybe think, there's a bit of a hope, I know, but maybe another few percent of people would think, oh yes, maybe they've got a point. And the same goes for the conspiracy theory one. You know, they are conspirators. It's clear that they are conspiring to run the world so that we have nothing and are happy. We should put a mixed blessing. and they have conspired to cause us deaths through the vaccines and probably deaths through the lockdown and so on. So when we're accused, if say, we go to court or even by Facebook, of causing danger to people by pronouncing that the vaccines are more deadly than not having them at all, that's the answer. It's the other way around. So that, I just put that out as a defence if you ever get into trouble.
Hi. All of these, everything everyone says has been absolutely fascinating and amazing. But I just want to, in a way, follow the gentleman who just spoke and address someone who said that we should cancel our subscriptions to the BBC, because I believe that much as I don't want to give my money to organisations that are a mouthpiece for the government, with the way things are, any of the current governments, I also believe that it's very important that we know what the narrative is saying, because they are shifting a little bit at times, and sometimes it gets worse. We need, if we're going to have, as David said, a meaningful conversations with people and build bridges rather than just talk in an echo chamber, then we have to know what the so-called other side, what what they're saying, because we can't address those points unless we know what it is.
You can still watch, you just don't give them your money.
I just said don't pay. Don't watch
We have to be careful not to only preach to the converted. We actually need to know what other people are being influenced by, what they're saying, otherwise we can't build bridges. And surely the kind of world we want to work towards is one in which we have unity, not division. Because I believe that's the cabal, whatever you want to call it, they want us to be divided. And what we need is unity if we want to move to a different type of society. That's my personal view.
We should unify. I think we should then all unify and everybody not pay their fee. If they were really that bothered about it, do you not think that they have the technology to be able to turn off your television channel in your house?
Yes.
If they were that bothered that you haven't paid your fee, then just turn off your channel and not let it trade. Why do you think they keep it on?
Yeah.
Think about it. Yeah, exactly.
Can I just
support
what the lady in the front said?
So what you say is right, and actually that's where I'm coming from as a lifetime journalist. My whole training was about telling both sides of the story, being fair and balanced, and letting people make their mind up. What's exercised me so much since I retired is that just seems to have disappeared. But you're absolutely right, we need to debate, and that's why I'm pushing various people, colleagues, people I work with, people I promoted, people I train. They're not answering my emails or anything. I'm just trying to push them to at least put the other side of the story. I don't care whether they're wrong, actually. It may be wrong. But there must be that argument to put the information out there to let people make their mind up. And it is difficult because so many, even my own son says to me, we can't be vaccine injuries there because it's not on the BBC News. It's a really tough task to break through that barrier. It's happening more and more because people say, why do they lose it? Because everybody's sick. But it's quite a big step to really open people's eyes to what is going on. But you're absolutely right, it's got to be done with unity.
We're going to have a couple more questions. I just want a positive note, reaching people. I find that talking to people and you talk about their issues, there are a lot of people who are really questioning the narrative. And I use my accountant as an example. But that, the narrative is being questioned. And, I've talked to a lot of people around about HS2, and I've never heard a Middle England woman say, the government are evil. This is what's happening. They're doing a land grab on HS2. It's about listening to people. It's about coming out, and I think that's where David's work has been fundamental in reaching people. We have to talk the language that they understand. And I think that's really a fundamental approach. And they're approachable. They're ready. People are ready to move and change. Anyway, I think there are a couple of questions. We want to wrap up. There are two summarisers, and also then there's going to be a vote. So,
I just want to make a quick comment, which picks up, I think, on what the lady in the front here said, that we do need to listen to what the other side is saying, and we can't just talk in an echo chamber. And that's very important, not least because I think, drawing on the essay by Václav Havel, I don't know if you've read it, he became the president of Czechoslovakia and dissolved the communist totalitarian system that was there. And we can learn a lot, I think, from his essay. I found it absolutely extraordinarily short. You can find a free online version of Havel's essay. It's called Power for the Powerless. And his message is a very simple one. He says that you can dissolve a post-totalitarian system, which arguably we have. It's a system that runs with lies rather than the heavy boot. And he said the way to dissolve the post-totalitarian society is with truth. and after a while, the truth dissolves the lies. And so when you're having these conversations, which are not in the echo chamber anymore, and you present people with truths, if you can get people into a receptive state, and I appreciate that's not always easy, but actually the truth trumps falsehood. And this is the lesson that he learned when he took Czechoslovakia out of the totalitarianism. True.
I think...
This lady is next.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, is that she?
One more question.
Sorry, 2 questions, and then we're going to wrap up.
What I was seeing that we are presenting all the problems and all the negatives. I was thinking that we could educate ourselves. We are learn more about common law, because I'm doing our Bill of Rights. I'm not English, but I'm learning a lot of this. And there are many people that are doing this universal commercial certificate about the birth certificate. And if you know more, our rights, we are people that are filing these documents, and they are very, very good, they are succeeding. And more people are doing this. And the more we are, the more we can be stronger. So
we're running short of time.
Could this be the last one?
Question. We had to summaries, and then we had to take it out.
Further to what Gloria said about communism, I lived in the Soviet Union for a year and a half in the early 80s as a student, and I was also working there later on. And I was exposed to a totalitarian system in its final stages. And I have to say that the censorship that I've seen in this country over the last 2.5 years is more sinister, more frightening, and far more effective than anything I saw in the Soviet Union. Because in the Soviet Union, people were very cynical, very blasé about the propaganda. They knew it was propaganda, they believed very little of it. Whereas in this country, precisely because the BBC had built up a wonderful, and I think deserved reputation over 97 years, with a few exceptions, therefore people automatically believed an organisation which had been, in effect, subverted by, I think, £30 million of funding by Bill Gates, for the BBC to trash and destroy their reputation in nearly a century in such a cynical way. Frankly, I think they should have had a few $100 million. I think they should renegotiate their contract with Bill Gates.
Sorry that we're sorry we have all the blood on the questions, but we have to be out of the hall at a certain time, and we have 2 summary speakers, and then after the 2 summaries, then we take a vote and over to oh, sorry.
The procedural vote we already had.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, I think it's pretty obvious who's won the debate. Proposers, I'm confused. Whose side are you on? Letting the audience know that you're pretending to believe in what you're saying, that's a great start. They're that embarrassed to debate their own motion, they had to change their names. I mean, I can't blame you. Nevertheless, I must do my job. What is censorship? The suppression of words, images, or ideas that are offensive or inconvenient. Yes, inconvenient is the word included in the definition. The proposition said no censorship equals because we have free speech. But does hate speech not take away that free speech? The proposition also said it's not government who impose censorship, it's private companies companies to impose censorship. But should government allow this? Censorship is unconstitutional, but what does this mean? It goes against the laws that define the relationship between the individual and the institutions. For example, the Human Rights Act, freedom of speech. Our side has proposed that the BBC has abandoned journalism. The media does not ask important questions anymore. We've said that the broadcasters do not question public policy, otherwise they would receive sanctions. Well, this goes against freedom of speech. Radio 5 Live said, do not debate with anti-vaxxers whether they are right or wrong, completely going against freedom of speech once again. The proposition said that England are on the 35th of the press freedom countries. Well, we may have legal freedoms, but what about the funders who fund the press? Don't they have a large say in what the press publish? The proposition also said censorship is for our own good. But does this not once again impose on our human rights? Some say that the vaccine was for our own good, but wasn't it experimental? Why are some people magnetic? 25,000 more deaths than normally since April, and this should be debated. Well, the proposition, slightly going off track from the motion, said that, well, the government helped businesses during the time of COVID. Well, I will still share my rebuttal. Only corporations like, for example, Sainsbury's or Waitrose were profiting off COVID-19. What about the local farmer who had to shut their business down? Proposers said that the government provided the best scientists in the world. Well, when you search in Google who's the most powerful doctor in the world, who turns up? Bill Gates.
He's not even qualified.
Exactly, he doesn't even have a medicine degree. In fact, he's also a farmer, but maybe he's just multi-talented. Thank you.
Well, to sum up, of course, our side made so many wonderful points with the Professor Tissier from Cambridge, that our behavioural, very, very qualified behavioural insights team, scientist and psychologist James Bloggs, psychologist, and our very own Mike, who is supporting and offering the view of his Middle England accountant, who of course thinks that the BBC is one of the best institutions in the country and can be absolutely trusted to speak the truth. Does the government willfully suppress information in the UK? Of course not. There is... Yeah.
Well, you would say that, wouldn't you?
Yeah. The accountant thinks that we have free speech in this country. Of course, Scarf, who took the mickey, needed to be censored, and Mary Whitehouse complained, of course, against obscenities, and we needed to have these marginally reduced under her influence. Laws are here to protect us, of course. And the BBC, as we've already said, is the finest and the fairest of organisations in the UK. Our accountant was very impressed by the restrictions and the way that COVID-19 was exceptionally handled by our government, keeping us extremely safe. In in very, very effective ways. And of course, ensuring that we were fully vaccinated several times, just to protect us to an even greater degree. Some of the people that are honourable comrades here we're talking about, I don't actually know. But the bounce back loans evidently helped many, many businesses who were falling on hard times. And they were a highly necessary part of the budget. And I'm sure we're going to see more financial safety nets for the people of this country proposed by the government, who we can completely trust when it comes to our finances. It's a great pity that the Russians are being so abused, and the Ukrainians also. There's more to say about that, and sovereign boundaries should not be breached. I think I might have got that slightly wrong. Bit of a hazy knowledge of the Ukrainian and Russian war. Right. And of course, in this country, we have a great history, as Mike showed us, of minor censorship, minor but very important censorship of the plays. Shakespeare was even, sadly, came a cropper of this one through his patroness Elizabeth, if you believe Shakespeare existed in the form that we're taught. And nowadays, I'm sure you will agree that it's very important that we have our X-rated films. We need to protect our young children from this kind of level of... I do remember the clitoris exposure. In fact, that was one thing that I definitely remember that Mike talked about. The clitoris trial, which resulted from the dance of Salome, which apparently an MP, whose name I can't remember, found that 47,000 British people were identified as sexual perverts. And I'm sure you will agree, lovely people here, that it's incredibly important not to expose our country to sexual perversion. Yes, absolutely. And now we come along to our Joe Blogs of the Behavioural Insight team. And these scientists are here to protect the public. They're paid by our government, who we elected, to protect us. I'm sure you'll agree this is, again, a very important thing. And the energy and attention that they put into the Mindspace document, which you can, of course, read at mindspace.gov. I'm sharing it widely because I can see, just the amount of intelligence that has gone into this document with some of the wisest minds in our society, in our academia. And of course, scarcity drives up demand. And as we know, the Behavioural Insight team encouraged us to buy more toilet paper. What would it be if you didn't have a toilet and you had to do it, with enough toilet paper, and you had to do it in the Roman way, where everyone shares a sponge on the end of a stick? This isn't really an option. Sorry, I've got to shut up. I think that's going to be shut up. So I'll just finish off with our wonderful Professor Sleepy here from Cambridge. She's unashamed to come from Cambridge. And I think she made many, many good points, which I don't need to highlight. But I would like to just remind everyone of this incredibly trusted professor's research, which they're doing in very, very important areas. And just to finish off, before I'm thrown off, that this extremely important quotation from Jacinta Ardern, which I can't read my own handwriting actually.
Yeah.
What does that say? Be ever alert to misinformation, because it could be the cause of war and the cause of chaos. We need our government to protect us, and censorship for the health of the people and the well-being of the people of this country in a minimum way is highly important. Thank you.
Yes. The vote is this House proposes there is no censorship in the UK. All the people who believe that, would you raise your hands? And all those who believe there is censorship in the UK, please would you raise your hands? I would say almost unanimous, apart from our speakers here, the vote has been carried. So, just to sum up then, were any abstentions? No. I would say virtually unanimous. Very good, thanks very much. Just to summarise, if anybody's interested in supporting the work we're doing, GB Unites, which is really to air all the sides that we can, as many strands as we can display to people, so they can make up their own minds, exactly as Mark said. We're not dictators. We don't want to impose our views. We want to expose things so people can decide for themselves. And so if anybody's interested in supporting GB Unites, just send an email to info@gbunites.com.
Yeah, and if you want to be a debater or put up subjects, that's what we're doing. We're now talking to universities and to schools to broaden the base of communicating to outside our own axis.
Absolutely, we want to reach the people who are not just the people who are. I mean, I take my hat off to the people who stood up against the police, the violence of the police. I really admire those people. But we want to reach the people in suburbia, the people who are just listening to BBC and nothing else. Those people are very important for changing the nature of our society. If they're exposed to different strands, that seeing is extremely important in our society.
Can I just say, if anyone would like to donate us a large amount of cash for our next debate, or write us a large cheque, we'd be very, very happy and approach Nicholas and Mike.
We've got to go.
There's an Instagram account, GB Unites. Just saying.
Oh, thanks very much, Isabel. Yeah. I just want to say what happens if we don't succeed. And I've got some letters here, some things I'd like to hold up. This one here, I'm sure you can't read it, this one here, and this one here. This first one was my grandfather's admission to British military intelligence, because he ran away from Hitler and joined his cousin, who was already in British military intelligence. And this letter makes him an honorary colonel in British intelligence, fighting against Hitler in the Second World War. This was a letter from his cousin, who was already in British military intelligence, saying he's a good bloke. Now, both those people died not knowing that Britain, just to show you the depth of his life being turned upside down, he was working in the paper industry, and there was a grapevine in the paper, and the grapevine said, Dr. Franklin, you're going to be arrested tomorrow. So he then took his Nazi documents, which is the third piece of paper, stamped by the Nazis, and he went, took his mother, his wife, my mother, and my aunts, 4 of them, on a train into Germany on the basis that no intelligent German would think a Jewish man would take his family into Germany. Then he took a train from Holland from Germany to Holland, and then a boat from Holland to the UK. And when they set foot on the English soil, they burst into tears of relief, obviously. Now, the thing is, the reason I mention this story is that that man and his cousin, who thought they were heroes and who had their lives turned upside down, didn't know that Britain, America, and Germany were together financing Hitler. And this can be read, just about Prescott Bush, Norman Montague from the Bank of England, and F.C. Tyers, who was on board the Bank of England. That information was censored from my grandfather. If it wasn't censored from my grandfather, he would have said, well, what on earth are we doing in this war? Nobody would have fought, because they would have seen the ludicrous nature of the whole business. That is the danger of censorship, because it's part of control. And once we see that, just like when we saw Prince Andrew, once we see that sort of thing, the whole thing topples down. So it's very important that people see things, and that's the nature of our debates, to expose things to people, then people can make up their own minds up. So I'd really like to thank you for coming, and for our panel, who have been absolutely exemplary in my view. And thank you very much for that.
Well, yeah, I mean, I was there and I saw how propaganda and censorship worked, and it's a lot more frightening because people.
Did they get rid of you then in the end?
Well, no, I kept going back. I mean, it wasn't under Stalin. I mean, I also was in Czechoslovakia for a few months as well. So the thing is, the propaganda wasn't effective because people reading it, they didn't believe it, and they also all listened to the BBC. And the BBC was obviously the BBC was anti-communist, and they were mostly telling the truth about most things at the time, and they had a good reputation. And now they've trashed it and destroyed it, and all they've got is £30 million in exchange for that. Right.
Sorry.
I was sitting behind you. I said
We were in Wokingham, weren't we, of course?
Where was it? No, it was Didcot, wasn't it?
Oh, Didcot, that's right. I've been to so many places, I tend to forget.
Just train station, Sloane Street. I do.
Sorry? What are you doing? Have fun?
Yeah, good idea.
Class all the way back.
I wanted to have a chat station outside
Sloane's on the side.
Early today?
Sorry?
Early today?
Yeah, but the yellow one is
Oh, yeah. Sorry.
West Ham.
You'd love to get hold of that, my career.
Hi,
See you later. Fuck.